Hello, everybody. It's sharp 11 o'clock. I still hear the bells ringing here in Switzerland. So we are right in time. It's my great pleasure to introduce today to you Ms. Erin Remblans. Hopefully I correctly pronounce it. From Frogeex, dialing in from Australia. So thanks a lot for taking the time, Erin. And
you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, I mean, maybe some of you know already Erin from LinkedIn. She's like a heavyweight lifter over there, very strong content that you share on the topic of post-growth, educating the audience, educating business owners, entrepreneurs, people that are just interested in sustainability, but also policy and thought leaders on the impacts and potential implications. So today it's also our topic to talk about post-growth. Some know the term also under degrowth. That's a very kind of highly discussed term that is for some paralyzing, for some very interesting. Definitely it's worth consideration and having a closer look at. And this is why we're so happy to get Erin here with us on the call today to kind of share more on the perspectives and maybe some tips also for entrepreneurs. And if you would have any questions or any comments, observations, we're streaming live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, so you're more than welcome to drop it in the comments, and we're happy to tackle that either in the discussion or afterwards. So with this, Erin, I mean, you are columnist for Illuminate, for Medium, and also, within your capacity in IPBES, you talk and write all around post-growth, degrowth, challenges in society, and the potential possibilities. How did you came to this topic? I mean, what was your journey to, that led you to post-growth, to being a thought leader in this segment?
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't an obvious journey. I haven't studied environmental sciences. I'm not a greenie from way back or anything like that. I studied business administration when I went through university. I did an honors year, and then my first role out of university was with Nestle. I worked there for a little while in fast-moving consumer goods. The irony was that I was the account manager there, and then for Unilever, and then subsequently for L'Oreal in London. And as an account manager, a national account manager, every day you're tasked with growing the business. That is what you are there to do. Every day you're chasing growth. You have that growth broken down into a yearly target, a monthly target, a weekly target, and sometimes even like we're tracking daily sales to see how we're going. So the irony of me being a big proponent of degrowth is not lost on me. But I also am very aware that when I was in those roles, sometimes you're sort of sitting back thinking, do we need all this growth? Like, what is all this growth for? And it wasn't until I had my first child. Probably, to be fair, it wasn't even my first child. It was more like after I'd had my third baby, I was reading, it was 2018, and I was reading the IPCC special report into 1.5 degrees of warming. And I was putting her to sleep. I was literally walking up and down the hallway, patting her in the back while I was wearing her, reading on my phone this report, just going, what? Like, I knew things were bad. I wasn't totally tuned out to it, but I sort of thought it was being looked after. There was the Paris Agreement. I thought things weren't as bad as it was, but it was a report in the New Yorker by David Wallace Wells, and it said the IPCC, the title was the IPCC says climate genocide is coming. Actually, it's worse than that. And from the moment I read that, once I collected myself, I sort of decided that I didn't want to turn away from what we were facing anymore. I just didn't feel like that was right. You can get lost in everyday things like renovations and mortgages and holidays or whatever, but I consciously made a decision not to do that. And so the next job I took, I went back to part-time work after having my youngest, and it was with the Carbon Reduction Institute. But that work felt very inadequate to the task at hand. So the Carbon Reduction Institute was basically selling offsets so that companies could claim that they were carbon neutral, which is, it's sort of a piece of the puzzle, but it's not enough. And I just felt like that wasn't ticking enough of the boxes for me. So I left and spent, I don't know, however long, 6 months, a few months, studying what felt to me like the genuine solutions to what we're facing. So I read a book, I don't think it'd be available international, called Full Circle, which was by an Australian Greens senator. And that book opened my eyes to our economy growing exponentially and infinitely, and what a bad idea that was. And after that, I read Jason Hickel's Less is More, and then I just read as much as I could get my hands on. I read both of Tim Jackson's books and some other degrowth books by some other degrowth scholars, and constantly ask myself, what do I do? Like, how do I be a part of this solution? And sometimes it feels like whatever you do is not enough, but that's where I started writing for Aluminum, and I've been doing that ever since. So that was maybe 18 months ago, and that's been a really rewarding partnership, and posting on LinkedIn, and I started IPBES at the start of the year as well. So that's my trying to do as much as I can to help people become aware of the challenges we're facing.
Hearing your story, and especially the part of becoming a mother, or being a mother, pretty much resonates as well with me. I mean, you're one of the mothers that have their child as well in their profile picture, which already says a lot. I mean, it's eventually also connected to some kind of motivation or inner pull that I can share with you. I definitely can relate to that. So it's pretty interesting, the journey that kind of determined you to be more active and educate more people. Now, those that read your blogs and your articles are sometimes really kind of, at least that's for me, the feeling like overwhelmed by the status. I mean, what the situation is. I mean, what are the outcomes? How is it for you now, being like intensively in this topic, working with it, looking at the gaps, the challenges that you see in the different parts of it? And happy if you like to maybe share any visuals or any kind of perspective on that, so we can also share some educational piece besides the discussion, the nice conversation that we have with our viewers or listeners. So what is it for you? I mean, where do you find the biggest struggle for to manage?
So me personally, I had
Yes.
it like for me. I like, honestly and genuinely, I feel like my heart's constantly racing a little bit. I don't know if you can relate, but when you're surrounded by this information a lot, you kind of have that like anxious kind of feeling a lot. So that so sometimes I was like, oh, I'm not sure how healthy this is. But I also think that I continue to be active because that is one way to relieve some of that anxiety as well. Like, and we go through this a little bit in the IPBES course that we run, but climate grief's a real thing. And as with all grief, there's 5 stages, and it's a process of moving through those stages, and they're not linear and they're not necessarily in order. And sometimes you'll go through them and bounce back to a different stage. But those stages are denial, bargaining. And I think we see a little bit of bargaining now, where we're trying to keep everything the same and just change some technologies. Depression, anger, and acceptance. And I think the quicker we can move through to the acceptance stage, the more able we are to do what we genuinely need to do. And when you're in that acceptance stage, that's when you can really find your superpowers, and push yourself to do what's needed, I think. And that's why I keep active, even though I have a slight heart murmur from it.
Now, great and very, very grateful as well that you mentioned this. You mentioned your course. So, how is the workshop built up, and how do you help businesses or entrepreneurs to? Because you also mentioned with the grief cycle or stages, to open their mind up to actually, I mean, okay, we need to do things completely differently. So, how do you do this? What are the kind of phases there?
Yeah, so and I guess IPBES was born a little bit through my experience of trying to find work in the sector. It's very hard to find a role that is genuine sustainability. I've found a lot of the roles were trying to sustain business as usual rather than trying to sustain life on Earth. And I was approached by Ryan, he's also known as, about creating the course, because he could see that we had a strong alignment with how we work. And actually, it's a really complementary skill set between Ra and I, because I am quite invested in the organizational and systemic changes that we need to see. And my learnings are quite academic, because that's where I've picked up my knowledge. And Ra's completely opposite. His knowledge is in the the worldview and the individual perceptions of how we live on this planet. And he is not picked up his information academically. He has traveled the world for 12 years and met with lots of Indigenous elders and has lots of ancient wisdom to share. And between the two of us, I think we cover all bases quite well. We have the ancient wisdom and the academic wisdom and the individual, the organizational, and the systemic changes we need to see if we want to bring about the more beautiful world that we all know is possible. And you can't achieve that more beautiful world without going through the process of the individual, the organizational, and the systemic. Just doing one of those isn't enough. It sort of has to be a journey of all three. And so the way the course is designed, like we focus on individual worldview for week 1 and 2, and then organizational and systemic in week 3 and 4 to get through the journey, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And now, we talk a lot about the term, but we did not say what it is about. So maybe could you bring us a little bit closer to the view of what is degrowth or post-growth actually about, and what are the kind of also paralyzing factors that maybe businesses or entrepreneurs that are maybe not yet so much in the topic or do not yet recognize the values or the situation, just to kind of also bring that closer to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, sure. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
So there's 2 definitions that I like to use to describe degrowth. The first is a planned and democratic reduction in material and energy throughput in overconsuming nations while improving well-being and social justice. So that's definition number 1. And that's just a recognition that, so for example, this year, Earth Overshoot Day will fall on the 2nd of August, which means that for the remaining 5 months of the year, we are stealing from future generations. So Earth Overshoot Day is the day in which we've used up all the resources and services and incidentally, Earth Overshoot Day in 1970 was the 31st of December. So in a 53-year period, we've gone back 5 months. And that means that we're using 1.7 planets worth of resources, which is clearly unsustainable. But that 1.7 is an average figure, and it hides or masks the fact that some countries are living as if we have 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 planet Earth. So basically, if everyone lived as if Australians lived in the entire world, we'd need 4.5 planet Earths. Like Australia's Earth Overshoot Day is the 23rd of March. If everyone lived like those in the US, we'd need 5.2 planet Earths. If everyone lived like those in Luxembourg, we'd need 6 planet Earths. So there are some countries specifically, and I call them over-consuming nations, that need to reduce their material and energy throughput if we are to not have an ecological debt come due in the coming decades. Mm-hmm. And to do so while improving societal well-being. So at the moment, our economy is very much focused on profit and growth and not so much focused on well-being or environmental sustainability. But by focusing on those things, we can actually improve human well-being and social justice at the same time.
Mm-hmm. You have, I believe, also a second. You mentioned 2 definitions. Would you like to? Yes.
Yeah. There's another definition which I really like as well, and it was brought into. So the man who brought degrowth into popular lexicon in the early 2000s, his name is Serge Latouche, and he's a French academic, and he describes it as a decolonization of the imaginary and an implementation of other possible worlds. I think I spelled decolonization wrong there, but an implementation of other possible worlds. And so this definition I really like, because if you take the D in degrowth and instead of choosing the Latin meaning of down and choose the Latin meaning of away from, what you end up with is away from growth. And it's about living without growth, which, it doesn't sound that crazy really. We don't need to grow our economy and every sector of our economy relentlessly forever to provide people with shelter and food and housing and clean water. We can do it in different ways, and we can do it in less harmful ways. And so where definition 1 was specifically about over-consuming nations, definition 2 is about all nations and all people in those nations, I think.
So what I hear from what you shared with us, and also out of the content that you share with your audience and your readers, is basically 2 elements that resonate quite a lot, and that is overconsumption, the social justice element, having the services needed for people to have a decent quality of life, shelter, water, food, healthcare, potentially education as well, equality. That are the topics that are kind of connected to this. Now, when we look at the economic part, at the business part, and I think there was this formulation, democratic reduction of material consumption and energy throughput, or how the word was. Is this realistic? Are there any like concrete discussions already happening? Because I mean, you're very active not only in Australia but also internationally. What is the mood internationally? Is this really becoming a topic? You hear a lot, you read a lot. I mean, but where are we? I mean, maybe if you can give us a temperature check.
Yeah, I don't think we're where we'd want to be. Like, honestly, I think that growth is still the main goal of all of the major economies of the world, even though we're like bursting through all the planetary boundaries. I might just share my screen again if you don't mind.
For sure.
So here are the planetary boundaries. So there's 9 planetary boundaries, and we're bursting through 6 of them already. And when we talk about economic growth, 3% each year might sound small, but it means a doubling every 24 years. And a doubling every 24 years means that after a 100-year time period, the economy will be 19 times larger than it is today. Like, nothing in nature grows forever, except for cancer. So this idea that we should always grow our economy is so unnatural and so removed from the way nature exists. Like, trees grow, but they stop and they mature. Children grow, but they stop and they mature, and they reach like this optimum size or whatever their natural size is. And we just haven't ever done that with our economy. I think the EU Beyond Growth Conference in May was a really good start. Well, not start, that was actually the second one. I'd had one previously in, I think, 2018, but that was incredible. For 3 days, conversations about post-growth and degrowth and moving beyond growth inhibited the halls and the walls of the EU Parliament. So I think there is some momentum. I don't think we're there yet. But I wouldn't disregard our ability to get to a social tipping point. I think that whatever we do, we can start moving towards more people talking about it. And the data says if you get 25% of people talking about something, it very quickly becomes 75% of people. So yes, there's a lot of work to do, but I think it's the right thing to do to keep talking about it. There's also another element there. So what we're talking about is not business as usual versus a degrowth or a post-growth world. We're talking about collapse or a degrowth and a post-growth world. Like, they're the 2 options now. You can't keep running this ecological debt and the debt not come due. Like, that's where we are. So as the climate breakdown becomes more evident, and I mean, are you in part of the world that's suffering a heat wave at the moment? I'm in winter, so I'm not. But
not so much as in Spain. Let me put it this way. But yeah,
and Italy and the US, like, it's everywhere. And the wildfires in Canada. This is at 1.2 degrees of warming. Like, the policies that we've got in place, so the actual policies add up to 2.7 degrees of warming. Like, we've burst through all these climate tipping points by the time we get there. So what I'm trying to say is that this is actually a Milton Friedman quote. He's not normally someone who we consider on our side, but it's the policies that are lying around at the time of a crisis that will get implemented. And I think there's a role for just keeping these policies alive and making people aware of them that relate to degrowth, so that when crisis happens, they've got a greater chance of being implemented.
I mean, when we would reflect on the COVID crisis that we had the chance to survive the last, I don't know, 3 years, it looks like it has been a long time ago since we are out of that. But it was actually a very good example how a slowdown of the economic activity can look like. I mean, it was very abrupt. It was very much forced upon us due to, I mean, lack of people that would be capable of doing the work, delivering the service, or being able to be there physically due to health issues. But imagining that we have heat waves where, I mean, you set the number 1.2 degrees already now. With 1.5, we know that the percentage of intensive weather events or extreme weather events is certainly increasing. There are some statistics that say it's going to be around 50 days or over 50 days a year, which is 1 day a week. It's going to be either an extreme storm or, flood or wildfire or, heat wave. And we have the seasons which are changing. So, I mean, at least we in Europe. So the question is, do you think it was a kind of, are there any learnings that we can connect or leverage from the COVID experience into, okay, this is something where we know, I mean, the signals are red, pretty dark red, and we are going into deeper red color. Is there anything we can implement that we can take away and say, hey, look, I mean, this is, something we can utilize?
Yeah, look, I think there were a lot of learnings that came out of COVID. One of them that I really find a positive message is that come, say, January 2020, would you have imagined that the world had shut down like it did? Like, it was just so unheard of in our lifetimes that we would, stop international travel, have people staying at home for months on end, close schools. And, something that I think is really important to the degrowth conversation is that governments found the money. This is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with modern monetary theory, but it was a really good example of when the money's needed, the currency issuing nations can find the money. So this whole idea that there is no money, we need taxes, we've got debt to pay off, it very quickly shows itself to not be the case. And so when we're wanting to fund things like a transition to renewables or a jobs guarantee to make sure that people who are in sectors that would be democratically determined to close down aren't suffering, these nations can fund it. They've proved it through the COVID experience. So I find that a really hopeful message. I do want to counter a little bit that COVID was not an example of life in a degrowth economy. Like, it was a bit hard. Like, we're social beings and socializing is really important for our mental health. And nothing about degrowth would say that we shouldn't be convening in cafes or in sports grounds or asking us to stay home and not go out. It's almost the exact opposite of degrowth. And through that process, like, lots of industry stayed open because they could manage it with the COVID restrictions, whereas the social activities were closed, like restaurants, bars, schools, that sort of thing. So it's not an
Hope we can get Erin soon back on the call. Seems to be a little bit of a disruption.
That example of life in the degrowth might come back. And so that element of slowing down, I think, is really interesting. And that time together as a family, lots of people picked up hobbies that they might not normally have time for. There's a lot of, sourdough making and, home cooking that hadn't always been done. Maybe more time in the garden, some guitar playing, connecting with friends over Zoom just to stay sort of healthy and well. So, I think it was an amazing example. Another amazing example we can take from COVID was the leadership that we saw. So it's going to be different in every country, but certainly in Australia, every day the political leaders would stand up and tell us what the new restrictions were, what was happening. Everyone would turn on their TVs at 11 o'clock to find out what was happening. And that leadership is missing from the conversation around our ecological crises at the moment. They ignore IPCC reports. They don't stand up in front of everyone and say, this is what the science is saying and this is what it means for us. They just go on as if it's business as usual and essentially say there is no implication for us in this news that they're sharing.
And thanks a lot for picking up also the piece on COVID example with the connection to the natural environment. So I found it very interesting. And indeed, I mean, when we talk about degrowth or post-growth, a lot around that is around social well-being, mindful life, conscious life, all what you mentioned. And what was also, or what is a little bit the discussion? I mean, now you can start as a person working with a business or with sustainability, start to think about how are we going to do this. Now this is a big topic. We know all sectors are involved. We need to, clean up, reorganize. It will be maybe very abrupt, maybe it will be gradual, and we will get the chance to do it in a planned way. So how do you plan? How do you look for, there will be a phase where we need to replan, where we need to reorganize the sectors. There will be a change because we know oil and gas, it's not good. We will phase it down. It's, there will be some peak still, or we are in the peak, and then we will come into a kind of, redistribute the sources. So
Yeah.
how do you plan for this? Or what is the perspective? Is degrowth here to stay, or is it a bridge period of, I don't know, few years, maybe a decade for regeneration, looking at it, reassembling kind of ourselves as a species, setting the right priorities, and then continuing on another path? Or what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, degrowth's 100% a phase. So it's not the end goal to have like a zero size economy or anything like that. It is just recognition that we're shooting through ecological boundaries. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the top line here is the carrying capacity of our ecosystems, and we're well past it. So degrowth is just acknowledging that we need to rein it in. And so for this phase, and I don't think anyone knows how long it will take, but the sooner the better. And then we can get back within the carrying capacity of the planet and stay between the two red lines. So the bottom red line is decent living standards, and then we'd be in what would be called a steady state economy. So it sort of moves up and down in terms of material and energy throughput, but nothing major, and it's not bursting through any of the planetary boundaries in that process. So yeah, 100% it's just a phase. It's not an end goal. It's just to get us back to, so if you turned those two red lines into a circle, you'd have Kate Raworth's donut economics, where the inner circle is the social foundations and the outer circle is the planetary boundaries. We just want to get back into the donut.
Yes, there was a very interesting report, I'm not quite sure, from an insurance company recently published on, the dependence of the economy on biodiversity. So it was a pretty interesting post on, having 50% of GDP, I think, being based on biodiversity. You can have a lot of discussion, those holistic thinkers, ecologists, and people working with nature that eventually, or maybe business owners that also source some input materials, which most probably a lot of them will be, are using it, may reconsider the number. But bridging that to the business element as we approach towards the end of our call today, how can a business owner and entrepreneur now absorb this idea, open up? I mean, for example, I'm sensitive to sustainability. I have a vision. I would like to, I don't want to damage the world or my kids or my grandchildren. Yeah. And how can I grasp this idea and try to embed it in the business that I lead, that I have? Yeah, what would be your...
Yeah, so this is a really big topic, and I don't know if I can do it justice in the time we have, but it would be about...
give you extra time.
It'd be about ensuring that what you're doing is either meeting human needs or it is restoring the planet. So yeah, it'd be one of those two areas. So I often think food, renewable energy, healthcare, there's certain sectors where you can go, yeah, that's obviously meeting a human need. If it's nail polish, if it's, I don't know, building mansions, if it's building SUVs, like they're sort of clearly not meeting human needs, but rather human wants. So I would think, position yourself in a sector that's going to help people or the planet, and then set up your organizational structure in such a way that it is regenerative and distributive. So they're actually Kate Raworth's terms, but to make sure that you're giving back to the community that you participate in. We don't want to just take profit and then keep that profit in a small number of hands. We want to set up structures like cooperatives, not-for-profits, worker-owned, those sorts of organizations that share the gains from a business enterprise among the people who are contributing to those gains. And that is how we, start to address some of the huge amounts of inequality that we see on the planet today.
Mm-hmm. Connected to this, I would have two final questions. And one of them is, when talking about collaborative approach, redistribution, funding a regeneration, or kind of making that work, having it as a livable or viable job for many, many people, or like an occupation or whatever we call it. Do you have any perspective that you would like to share with us on Web3, autonomous organizations, or DAOs, the so-called DAOs? What is your perspective? I mean, can they play a role? Can they facilitate and help this approach, also in the going more and more digital?
So do you mean like AI and those sorts of things, or?
I mean, decentralized autonomous organizations, basically all these blockchain-based structures where you can invite players in and kind of distribute wealth in a very direct way, a very, very also collaborative way, possibly.
Yeah, I don't know enough about them to comment. I have seen people suggest that they're the way forward, but I haven't looked into it. But it really comes down to those principles of, are you taking wealth and funneling it through to a small number of people, or are you taking wealth and sharing it in the community and investing it back into doing good things? And so I guess some blockchain companies could be the former and some could be the latter. It would be about the principles of the organization itself.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, the apparently complex things actually come down to some simple principles that, if they are maintained, they can work well. So
yeah, I think there is some simple principles we can all follow to have kinder organizations, I guess might be the right term.
Mm-hmm. And just to close this off, you mentioned some interesting principles for an organization that is future-proof for the coming time. Do you have also some real examples of maybe former clients or organizations worldwide that work on this basis that you can share with us?
Yeah, there's a few, and they may not be perfectly sort of degrowth or post-growth aligned, but they have lots of those elements. So one interesting one is Wikipedia. So that's a not-for-profit organization that's funded by lots of individual donations. So it's not, it's not funneling the results or it's not a for-profit business that is, throwing ads in our direction or anything like that. So that's one. There's a French liqueur, I probably won't say the name right, owned by some monks, Chateaubrius maybe, and they've decided that they're not going to increase their production because they don't want to be causing any more environmental harm. So they've got they make enough money to fund their monastery, and that is what they're going to stick at. So I think it's a private company structure, but it sort of operates with the same principles as a cooperative or something like that, where they're not just after capital growth. They're there to do the right thing by their environment and the people that work for them. There's a big organization called Mondragon in Spain, which is, I think it's got 80,000 employees, but they're all cooperative organizations, and they all share the profits from their business back to employees. So it's not perfectly post-growth because they exist in a capitalist environment and they do need to grow to survive. But just this idea that you can have organizations that are owned by the employees and do good things and achieve scale is quite interesting. Actually, I've probably got about 20 examples in the REBIZ course, but they're the top 3 that come to mind.
Super. So a great bridge also towards the end. So is this REBIZ courses that you are having happening on a regular basis, or do you have fixed dates, or how is that? When is the next one coming?
The next one is the 30th of August. We tend to close applications about 2 weeks beforehand, so about the 16th of August. And there'll be a second one before the end of the year, which will be late October. So yeah, follow us on LinkedIn if you're wanting to learn more, or just, be aware of when our applications are closing. Yeah, I think it's unlike anything else in the marketplace. I think it is, and it's very important to us that it's genuinely what the world needs. Yeah. So the feedback from people who've been through the course has been along those lines as well.
Thank you so much, Erin, for your time, for spending your evening with us here in Europe from Australia. And we appreciate super and pretty much the insights that you shared. In case you would have any links, of course, we will also share the link to your blogs, etc., so people can follow you and read a little bit more on the topic. And hope to see you more, and let's do more together to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Happy to do so. My name is Jana Skokan. I'm the co-founder of Frogeex, and I see you on the next Frogeex Green Tech Live with an amazing speaker like Erin today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.